The 551st edition of the Four Corners podcast starts right now.
This is the Four Corners podcast.
And that could make a difference. Lawson at the buzzer. Got it! Maybe not. Ty Lawson wins it at the buzzer.
Deep three. And Green rips down the rebound in traffic. 4-on-1.
What a great job. What a terrific job in transition. I mean, you couldn't plan that any better as a coach.
Gets the roll. Here we go. Page has it. Carolina down one. 84-83. Page into the front court with 4 seconds. Page to the rim. Got it! He got it! 9/10 of a second to go. Inbounds. Washington gets it to Warren. His full court shot. No good. Marcus Page baby. Does it for the Tar Heels. Carolina wins it.
Don't force it if you're Goss.
Comes in. Blocked by Meeks. Buried up ahead to Jackson, and he tucks it down for the 5-point lead. Matthews off the mark, and this year the confetti is going to fall for North Carolina. They're not going to be denied this time. Inside 30 overall. Love, top of the key. Oh! Big time delivery.
Here are your hosts, Josh Marlowe and Anthony Pagnotta.
Hello and welcome into another live edition of the Four Corners podcast. We are powered by Carolina Electrical Services. Josh and Anthony here with you guys on a Wednesday afternoon, 2.5, maybe 3 hours or so after the news that Drake Powell has declared for the NBA draft became official. Of course, he had up until this weekend to make a decision. And while the clock was running out, he made that decision today. And it appears that he will forego his remaining eligibility and pursue a career and his dream of playing professional basketball. So we're here to talk about that decision, what it means for Carolina, moving forward in the transfer portal, as well as some other things that just relate to his decision to go pro. We got an update on some Carolina's non-conference schedule. It's coming together for next season. We'll talk about that as well. But we start every edition of the pod, as we always do, with the pod thought of the day. Go to legendary coach Dean Smith for that pod thought. And that thought is, quote, never let anyone play harder than you. That's part of the game that you can control, end quote. And, I thought that was a quote that applied to Drake Powell, a guy that I think from the moment he showed up till the season getting defeat against Ole Miss, that was a guy that competed. Hubert Davis often talks about whether it's in shoot-around practice, let alone, during the games, that everything is a competition and you don't want to lose. And it felt like Drake Powell was a guy. We knew after Maui he was going to be a big part of this year's roster. I think, it obviously took some time for Hubert Davis to figure out the right role, to put him in the right spot, because they had him playing out of position as that stretch four. When they got done with the Maui Invitational, he was obviously a lot more comfortable playing at that 3 position. Yes, still on the wing, but not having to guard the type of guys you had to guard when he was playing as an undersized 4-man. But, I think it's why we were really hopeful he would be back, because you would get, your best defender back, one of the best defenders in the conference, one of the best defenders in the country. A guy that, you thought could really take a step offensively. But I really thought the way that he played, the way that he competed would be something that this team could really feed off of next year had he returned. But that's not the case, as he did make it official earlier today that he is going to pursue the NBA. This is coming after, one season in Chapel Hill, played in 37 games. With 20 starts. The stats won't blow you away. Just averaged over 7 points, over 3 rebounds, a little over 1 assist. But something we talked about from the time he arrived and all season long, his body, his game, his frame is what the NBA wants. It's what the NBA desires. When you factor in the fact that he's a willing defender, that makes him all the more attractive to go to the next level. And so while we were hopeful, I can't say that I'm overly surprised because we knew after, the beginning of the season when he really flashed his potential, this was always going to be on the table for Carolina because his talent is something that the NBA wants and needs, and he'll go chase that career of playing professional basketball starting this offseason.
Yeah, I mean, it's not stunning that he ends up entering the NBA draft. I would have been shocked if he wouldn't have entered the NBA draft. I think what's more shocking is the fact that, Carolina, I think thought there was a good chance that he would be back next year, that he would enter the draft, go through whatever, they're going to put him through in Chicago, and then he would ultimately probably make the decision to come back because he would think that his stock next year could potentially be higher than the stock that he's going to have this year. As of right now, I mean, the one big board that I saw before we did this podcast was Bleacher Reports. They sent me a notification right after he entered the transfer portal, and it said that he was 38th on the big board. I am kind of worried that he's going to get stuck in a similar situation to what we saw Harrison Ingram get stuck in last year, where, he's going to get some bad advice, to come out and potentially get stuck with a second round destination where they ultimately don't use him a whole lot. And, that's kind of what you would think, being in that 38 range could potentially land you. You look at the San Antonio team that Harrison Ingram is on. It's not like that's necessarily a title contending team. They're not really that close just yet. And yet he was a guy that spent most of the year in the G League and was having to try to work his way up just to get a jersey with the Spurs and play in any games this year. Scored his first points against the Charlotte Hornets in a game that I remember doing for the station here at WFNZ. But, I just, that's the one thing that I'm a little worried about with this decision from Drake, if he's going in and not leaving it open for him to be able to come back. Now, ultimately, I think that option is on the table for every guy. I think that everybody that enters the draft now, because it used to be if you hired an agent, then that was it. Now everybody has agents. You have agents that represent you for the NIL stuff. And most of the time you're just going to carry that agent over with you to the NBA. That's what it appears that Drake Powell is doing. And so that doesn't really tell us a whole lot. So, I mean, he could potentially still come back. I would welcome it because I think it would give Carolina a guy that's developing in his second year. I think he would take another step offensively. I think, what he brings as a three-point shooter on that end of the floor already is good enough. And then, what he brings defensively, you can't really find anybody else on this team that's going to be able to do what he could do defensively for you. Maybe that's Caleb Wilson. Maybe that's a guy that can guard anywhere from the 4 to the 2 guard spot, possibly even the 1. That's what you had in Drake Powell. You had a guy that could even guard the 1 spot while being 6'6". I don't know necessarily if Caleb Wilson can do that, but he provides a lot of versatility as well. But yeah, this is one that hurts, man. There's no doubt about that. And it means that Carolina needs to go out and find somebody to try to take his place, a task that will not be all that easy for this staff to be able to find.
Yeah, I mean, I was a big believer he was coming back, and probably because I was a little bit naive, and something that I think I still have to change my mindset around as a fan. I really thought a guy that grew up 30 minutes away from Chapel Hill in the shadows of the program, wanting to play at Carolina, wanting to be a Tar Heel, would want to enjoy more success than what the team he played on enjoyed. I thought that if he would have come back, that Carolina would have been really better suited to have a much better season in terms of win total and NCAA tournament, result. Ultimately, that stuff does not matter nowhere near as much now as it did 5, 10, even 15 years ago. And that's what these guys getting paid as well. Like, even though Carolina, could probably get close, match on a year-to-year basis what his NBA contract would be as a rookie because the money is nowhere near as big as it is in the NFL. It's still, you're living the life of the NBA, which is a much more attractive, it's a much more better lifestyle than, playing, yes, 40 games in college, but still having to go to class and have all those responsibilities as a student athlete. I think what differentiates him and the Harrison Ingram, when you look back at his decision, like Ingram had that season where like he was probably being honest with himself where unless I win a national championship or get to a Final Four, how could I have a much better experience than what I had? I played on a team that won an ACC regular season title. I won a game at Cameron, it was a one seed in the tournament, made the Sweet 16. And so while as much as I wanted him back, and there's no doubt that Carolina would have been better had he returned this past season, it made sense why he decided to go and not really leave the door open to return. The fact that Powell released the statement that he released, and you see all the reporting from whether it's Inside Carolina, THI, or the guys that cover the sport nationally, I mean, unless he just A, flops in the combine, or B, just gets back a lot of bad information, there's not the door being open for him. And, you referenced the mock draft that you saw. ESPN has him 31st. So you're still talking about a second round draft pick. I think CBS Sports, Kyle Boone had him ranked as the 26th best prospect in the upcoming draft. Like, ultimately, do I think he'll be a first round selection? I do. I think, when he goes through the testing, when he goes to the combine, you'll see those traits that make him so desirable. But, if he was a consensus top 15, top 20 pick, would not be surprised that he was basically moving on. It is a little surprising that, yes, he can still potential to be a first-round pick. There's a good potential he's going to be a second-round pick, and it appears he's not leaving that door open. That's what I found, I think, the most surprising. You couple that with the fact that Jaren Stevenson got picked up in the portal, a guy that he played with, a guy he had a relationship with, and I'm not saying that's why Carolina recruited Stevenson, was to bring Drake Powell back, but I thought that was a move that would lean the odds back in the favor of a Powell coming back. I think that's what's the most surprising to me, is not surprised that he's going through the draft process. Every player in theory should A, enter the portal to find out their value, and B, enter the draft to figure out how they can improve as a basketball player. It is odd, though, considering his stock is not consensus top 15, top 20, that he's not leaving that door open for a possible return for next season.
Yeah, I mean, because there are holes in his game. I mean, you look at what he is as an offensive player. I mean, really, he is a 3-and-D guy at its core. There's not really much there to it. He's not a guy that's going to be able to create on his own. He's not a guy that has, been able to show that he can offensive rebound and put the ball back up in the net. That's something that people value as well. And he just hasn't shown the ability to drive the basket just yet. So, I mean, all those elements of his game, I think they can be there. I think it will be there in time. This is, to me, what he's probably being told is what a lot of guys have been told before. It's better to go early to the NBA than it is to go late, because when you go early to the NBA, you're going to, as a younger prospect, be more valued. They're going to look at you as someone that has much more potential, that they can mold in their own system. That's what they're looking for, are guys that are like pieces of clay, that they can mold themselves. They don't want guys that have been in college, that have gotten used to playing a certain style for 3 or 4 years. That's always been the argument. And I think that's what they're going to argue with Drake Powell here. That was the thing when I was saying earlier, when we were talking about it with some of our coworkers about these guys entering the portal, or not entering the portal, Drake entering the draft, and comparing it to Harrison Ingram. He said, look, the one thing that he's got going in his favor is that he is younger than Harrison Ingram was. Harrison Ingram was, still a young player, but he wasn't as young as Drake Powell is. People are going to look at that age. They're going to look at the fact that he was at one time a top 10 draft prospect, and they're going to say, this is a guy that we can mold ourselves. And so that's the thing. I hope that he ends up sneaking into the end of the first round, because if he lands on a contender and they feel like they can mold him, then he's going to be able to have some success right away. If not, and he goes in that second round, you wonder, what his career actually ends up becoming. I mean, that's the same range that we saw Day'Ron Sharpe get taken, and look at what Day'Ron Sharpe's career has become. Unfortunately, there hasn't really been much for him, and it's a very similar circumstance. I think that, Day'Ron Sharpe, when he left at the time that he did, I thought he was a guy that could be a good NBA player, but I thought that the best thing for him to do would be to come back. I think it's the same scenario for Drake Powell, and unfortunately, if he doesn't find his way back to Chapel Hill, I do wonder where exactly his career is going to go at the NBA level.
Yeah, because if he was at the back end of the first round, you're being drafted by a playoff team, which means you're being drafted by a good organization. That's not a guarantee in the second round, and the NBA draft is. It's not it's not like the NFL draft where, yes, you see trades happen in the second round, but in the second round, man, it's literally a crapshoot. Like, so many deals get done to where, he'll be drafted and possibly traded 3 or 4 or 5 different times. And so it's really just, I think it's just really interesting. And it's really odd because as you mentioned, we were operating because, and I think the staff was operating as if he was going to be back for next season, which leads you to believe that there was a financial commitment that was there to ensure that he would be back. I got told by a source that one donor came to Hubert Davis over the weekend and said, "You name the price, I'll write the check to get Drake Powell back." So, this wasn't a situation where he wasn't being valued. This wasn't a situation where Carolina was not willing to, I think, meet the financial demands. I think it was the exact opposite. I think Hubert Davis knew, man, if I get this guy back, we could really be in a good situation to compete next year. And I still think that that's still on the table. I'm not saying that Drake Powell not being on this roster eliminates that, but with what Carolina had done, I was starting to flirt with, if you get Drake Powell back, this might be a top 3 roster in the ACC. You could maybe argue that, it could finish top 2 right up there with what Louisville and Duke have done. Duke's bringing in a bunch of freshmen. Louisville reloaded in the portal. Carolina could maybe be competing where we expect them to compete on a year in, year out basis, which now leads us to, I guess, the conversation, which is now what? Because Carolina had been pretty quiet in the portal until late Sunday, late Monday night. All of a sudden, once we found out that Van Allen Lubin was entering the portal, but is expecting to return, Carolina decided to get involved with Andre Stoyakovic, the Cal transfer, someone that they got involved with last offseason when he transferred from Stanford, and quite frankly, should have been involved with the second year of the portal to begin with. He had his visit to Illinois. They've been the front runners for him since he entered the portal. On3 Sports label, they gave the prediction for him to be to sign with Illinois earlier today. So, assuming that Carolina's out of the running for Andre Stoyakovic, where do they turn? Because I do believe that with Powell not expected back, they go add at least one more body out of the portal that's not Van Allen Lubin officially returning. Do you agree with that, or do you think we're still in a situation that Carolina has done outside of the Van Allen Lubin's decision?
No, there's absolutely no way that they're done. No way that should be done. If they are, then I think you're staring at a situation that you don't want to be in, which is that, and I don't know if this roster is worse than this past year, but it is debatable on where this roster is compared to last year's roster, because you would be without a wing player. Just like you entered this past year without a big man, you would enter without a 3. So then you're going back to, okay, are we playing small ball again? Are we going with Jonathan Powell to potentially take his spot. That's a guy that, we think he has potential, especially with this team. But at the same time, we look at it as, hey, one of the things that we really want to see from him is, playing well off of the bench. I really hope that, honestly, what ends up happening is that, Stoyakovic ends up reconsidering and Carolina is potentially able to go out and grab him. I still think that there's time, because to me, if it was such a sure thing that he was going to commit, he would have committed last night when he was there for a visit. I do think that means that the door is left open, but it's going to take a lot of money. And that's the thing, is that you need Carolina to be aggressive, because outside of him, there really isn't much that you can see in the transfer portal and say Carolina's got a legitimate shot to land one of these guys on the wing. I mean, RJ Lewis is a guy that is still available. I think that's someone that you could potentially look at. But I mean, the thing with him is that he's a guy that's also in the NBA draft. I believe that's the same thing for Jameer Watkins. That's certainly a guy that if he ends up coming back to the college level, you should be willing to go after, because you look at what he did in the ACC this past year, he certainly fits what you're looking for. Maybe you could find a way to make Darion Williams, the transfer from Texas Tech, fit. He is 6'6", 225 pounds. So he's a little bit of a thicker player, but he's a guy that is listed as a power forward, played the power forward spot this past year for Texas Tech. They just went with a smaller lineup. Is that a guy that you can make fit with where you're at? That's some of the things that Carolina is going to have to do if they can't land Andre Stoyakovic. And I think that, there are other guys that we could get into, like Chad Baker-Mazara. You talk about wanting a little bit of attitude on your team. That might be a little too much attitude for your team. But yeah, I mean, the number of options is really starting to dry up. And that's what's concerning about where Carolina's at right now and how late this decision comes. And this is what sucks, man. I mean, you could have tried to push him, I think, a little bit, and tried to get him to make an announcement a little bit earlier. But I don't really know where that ultimately gets you. I don't know if that, means that he closes the door on a possible return. I think he's probably done that anyways, but you don't want to take that risk if you're Carolina, if that wasn't what was on his mind. So I think they did the right thing by letting it play out. But yeah, you're in a situation now where it really looks like it's Stoyakovic, or else you have to completely reset and look at a whole different group of guys, a good group of them, or a good many of them that are entered into the NBA draft. And who knows if they're actually going to be playing at the college level next season.
Yeah, when it comes to Stoyakovic, I'm going to be very blunt. If landing him costs you Van Allen Lubin, you need to be okay with that.
Mm-hmm.
And this is coming from a guy that was a big supporter of Van Allen Lubin, was a big fan upon him transferring in last offseason, and really stressed wanting him back after the way he finished the end of the season. With those 11 games where he averaged, almost 14 points per game, 7 rebounds, a shot, 67% from the field. I was at the ACC tournament for all but one game. Andre Stoyakovic was one of the 5 best players I saw in person.
Yep.
And I mean, whether that means anything to y'all or not, I don't know. I hope y'all respect my basketball opinion and what I tell you when I think of a player. But if I was putting together a list of the 5 best players that I saw there, he was on that list. You're talking about just his size, for one, is something that is desirable. And you look at him, you look at his frame, you hear his last name, you think, well, he just stands in the corner and shoots a bunch of threes. He's not his dad. Like, he can handle the ball in the half court. So if you want to play Kyan Evans off the ball with him, you can. With his size, he has a great post-up game, a great back-to-the-basket game, and kind of like what Harrison Ingram was able to do 2 years ago and was so effective. Man, he can get the ball, isolate himself on one end of the floor, and just control the game with his ability to pass, with his ability to shoot. He's so diverse, and he's in such control. And so, we know Lubin is basically, agreed to financial terms that he agreed to when he transferred in a year ago, is waiting on that house settlement to get extra funds to really commit to coming back. If I'm Hubert Davis, if I'm Jim Tanner, I'm hitting up that booster that was willing to pay X amount of dollars to get Drake Powell back. I'm combining that with the funds that you would have committed to Vinhau and Lubin, and I'm putting that in front of Andre Stoyakovic and making him make a decision. Brad Underwood's a good coach. Illinois is a good program. They play a fun brand. They play a fun style of offense. Or do you want to come play at Carolina, one of the premier programs in the country, and have a chance to win on the biggest stage? So I know this kind of reiterates what, or kind of contradicts how much we were talking about how much we wanted Vinhau and Lubin back on Monday, and there's still a lot to value there. But for me, if I'm Hubert Davis and I'm Jim Tanner, I'm putting all in my efforts into seeing what is possible. What would it take to get Andre Stoyakovic to Chapel Hill? Because I think you add him to that roster, you're talking about a roster that I think would be top 15 in the country, and we could legitimately talk about winning an ACC regular season title, something that I think is achievable, but is maybe a little bit distant if you bring back Vinhau and Lubin.
Yeah, I mean, look, some people are wanting to know how did he perform in certain games against big opponents. That's one of the things that they're trying to sort of tear apart, is how he performed against Carolina, how he performed against Duke. I mean, look, that was a stretch during the season where he was scoring about 8 points per game. And guys are going to go through those ups and downs. But when this dude is really on, he is one of the best players in this conference. And the thing that you have to remember is, you could say, well, he didn't play great against some of the best competition. Even if that is the case, which you look at some of the other competition that he played early in the season. I mean, tournament teams like Vanderbilt scores 17. Missouri scores 26. Clemson scores 30. He has the ability to take over games at a high level. And the other thing to remember is that, yeah, teams were able to key in on him at certain times because he was the only offensive threat on the floor. I don't know if you guys realize this. Cal was a pretty bad basketball team last year. They, outside of him, they really were absolutely nothing. He's the only reason that they made it to Charlotte. They barely made it to Charlotte too. And once they got there, he was the only reason that they ended up winning a game in Charlotte and almost winning their second game. I mean, he scored 37 points in the game in Charlotte against Stanford. That is pretty amazing. I mean, he's not a guy that's like his dad, where he is just going to stand out there and shoot 3 after 3. He can create off the bounce. There's a lot to like in that portion of the game, and he gets to the foul line a ton. I mean, he got to the foul line 165 times last year. He shoots it at an 82% clip from there. So you like what you see there. And also, I mean, you look at the other areas of the game. He rebounds well, as you were mentioning. He shares the ball pretty well, especially for someone that is on a team that really is not that great around him. It would make sense why you don't share the ball at that high of a rate. But I think this is the guy that Carolina needs to go after. And here's the thing. You look at how he performed at California this past year. I mean, even if you go back to his year at Stanford and you're a little concerned by some of the numbers that he put up there, remember that was with him basically having to be one of the best players on the floor, or the best player on the floor when he was at Cal. I mean, even Stanford that year probably expected him to come in and really light it up, especially from beyond the arc. And he just, I think they had trouble adjusting to the fact that he is more of a complete player. And that's part of the reason why he ended up moving on from them when he did. But I think, this year at Cal, like if he comes to Carolina, you're talking about him being surrounded by Caleb Wilson, by Henry Vasar, by Kyan Evans in the backcourt, Seth Trimble, who we hope is going to take another leap on the offensive end of the floor. These are the guys that you're putting the trust in as well to be able to score around him at a pretty high rate and take some of the pressure off of him, not make him have to be the player that he was at Cal, which is a guy that shoots the ball a ton, isn't necessarily the most efficient, but scores it at a really high rate. I think this could be the perfect scenario for him, where if he goes to Illinois, it might be more of the same. I know they got the Avicic brothers. I think that's certainly something that is going to help them this year, having both of those guys on the team at the same time. And Tomislav last year was a really nice secondary piece, but you would be looking at another situation where you're going into it as the top scoring threat and there's no one else that's really going to come that close to you. That's a situation that I think maybe he wants, but I think you could also potentially be, the leading scorer at Carolina. I think that is certainly on the table for him. So I look at it as, honestly, this is the perfect fit for Stoyakovic. There is plenty of playing time that's now available, and that's the guy that Carolina should be going after. And if they don't land him, I'm not going to say that it's going to be a disappointment whoever they land, but I do think that it makes things more complicated in terms of seeing them land a difference maker at that position, which is what I think they certainly need now without Drake Powell.
Yeah, I think he would just be the perfect complement to Kion Evans and that backcourt on that perimeter. For all you guys that were concerned about, well, who's going to help, score the ball from the perimeter? He would be a guy that could help, score from the outside, but does provide, a versatile scoring arsenal. And something that I think, Hubert Davis and the staff could really jump in and utilize, because you mentioned it. Like, you gotta look at what happened at Cal and at Stanford, and you gotta take it with a grain of salt. Like, he'll be playing with better players here. He'd be playing for a better coach here. He'd be playing for a better staff here. Now, with it comes a lot more pressure and a lot of expectation to perform at a high level. But I think he's a kid that would be up to the task. So, I think it's going to be interesting to see. He was, the visit was yesterday. Nothing has been made official so far. So maybe he is waiting to see what Carolina has to offer. It feels like if Carolina can get him to campus, that could really be a step in the right direction. I know we've brought some guys in that have visited and ultimately not committed. That feels like one where Carolina would put on the full court press. They'd have everything buttoned up, taking them to the best restaurants, whatever it is that you got to do nowadays, in addition to handing them the check. But that would be one that I think if he just comes to Chapel Hill, that would be, open to wanting to come play what would probably be his last year of college basketball here next season. So, I think, we were talking when Van Allen Lubin entered the portal on Monday, how, he was kind of holding the program hostage with his potential decision. I think with Drake Powell's decision to go pro, you kind of got to reverse course and say, Lube, we love you. We like you. We'd love to have you back. But, Carolina's got to be comfortable over recruiting its roster. And I think that's harder for some coaches. It's very easy. For some coaches, that's very hard. I think it's hard for Hubert Davis because he's so personable. He's so relatable. Like, these relationships matter. But, for a coach that's entering a pivotal year for his future, he's got to bring in as much talent to put together the best roster. And so if bringing Andre Stoyakovic is what's best for Carolina, then you got to do that, because Van Allen Lubin will find the money he's looking for somewhere else. That's just the simple point of the matter. Whether it's all from revenue sharing or from a combination of both, Van Allen Lubin would still be able to find the funds that he's looking for. So a very interesting, I think, dilemma right now on Carolina's hands. No matter what, though, I don't think they're done adding to the roster. I think now what you got to wait to see play out is, what is the caliber of player are you adding to the roster? Are you adding a difference maker, an all-conference caliber player like an Andre Stoyakovic, or are you bringing in a role player that would be your 8th or 9th guy, in the rotation that is probably being phased out as you get into the back half of the regular season and into the NCAA tournament.
Well, I mean, it could still be a starter. I mean, it could be like, I'm going to tell you right now, a name to keep an eye on that could re-enter the conversation here because he's a bigger guard is Nick Dorn. That's certainly a name that I could see Carolina being interested in again. And I mean, I think he would be a part of the rotation the whole year because I don't know about you. I don't feel like Jonathan Powell is a guy that ideally you want as your starting 3-man. To me, I know he's got the size. I just don't think that's ultimately what you want. Nick Dorn, I know that he went to Elon. That's where he had his success, was at the mid-major level. But I still feel like this is a guy that can thrive, can score the ball at the rate that you need him to if you give him a chance at Carolina. So to me, I mean, I wouldn't hate it if that was the situation. All it means is that if you get a guy like Stoyakovic, then you're getting a guy that you know and you can look at and say, we may have our leading scorer on the roster here. If you get a guy like Nick Dorn, you're looking at him and saying, okay, we've got what could be our third or fourth scoring option. We need to find our number one scoring option. And I think that's what's a little scary is we don't know who that number one scoring option is right now. That's going to be debated throughout the offseason. Like it could be Kyan Evans. It could be Caleb Wilson. I mean, I'm not going to say that it's definitely going to happen. There's a possibility that it could be Seth Trimble. You would hope that that's not the case, but I think you're looking at that trio right there, and that's where you're going to have to find your leading scorer more than likely from. That's why I think there are tiers to this, and I'm kind of hoping that Carolina finds a way to get Stoyakovic, because if you get Stoyakovic, we're talking about competing to win this conference. If you don't get him and you instead go with the Dorn, I think you're talking about a team that makes the NCAA tournament field, maybe makes it solidly, but I don't know if they are competing to win the ACC regular season.
Yeah, I'm going to be very blunt. Unless they add Andre Stoyakovic, Kyan Evans is going to be your number one scoring option next year. And, you know, as I watch him more, I study him more, dig into him more, I think this is going to be a kid that we'll be talking about next year, top 3 transfer in the country. I think he is going to be a superstar at Carolina. So you add Stoyakovic, I think that maybe changes. I think, you know, Stoyakovic does elevate himself as your number one scoring option. Outside of that, I think Kyan Evans, I think that's what Carolina brought him in for. And you look at what he did the last 14 games at Colorado State. He's not going to be afraid to be that type of guy. And he was more than, you know, he almost led that team to the Sweet 16. So, you know, he's not going to be afraid of the moment that he'll be playing at consistently at Carolina. So we'll have to wait. We'll have to wait and see. You know, we'll see what happens with Stoyakovic, see what happens with Lubin, see what happens with Powell, and just kind of see where ultimately this roster does shape up as, you know, this offseason continues to move forward. Speaking of that, the non-conference schedule is slowly coming together. You know, you've seen people, I know, like Ariel Bynum from Tar Heel Tribune, John Rothstein, you know, they have reported some games that Carolina has agreed to. I always wait till the program confirms stuff to really talk about it here on the podcast. And the program confirmed earlier today. We knew they were going to be playing in the Fort Myers tip-off against Michigan State. That game will take place on, I believe it's on Thanksgiving Day. It may be Black Friday, but they'll also play St. Bonaventure down there as well, as they've added, you know, a 2 more teams to that event. And now there's going to be 2 games that Carolina will play. What's interesting about this is, unlike where you go to Maui, unlike where you go to the Battle for Atlantis or some of these other events, it's not a tournament. These are predetermined matchups, and they're not played on consecutive days. So it's more like an NCAA tournament type of setting where you play one day, take a day off, and you play again the next day. But, you know, that was confirmed earlier today. We knew the Michigan State part, but St. Bonaventure has been added. Carolina also has been reported of games against, you know, East Carolina. I think they're going to open with Central Arkansas. A lot more friendlier non-conference schedule. a lot more net-friendly non-conference schedule. Something we'll talk about way more in depth once that becomes made official sometime later this summer. So, but if you're looking to make plans to see the Heels, go to goheels.com. They've got all that information about when ticket packages will be made available. But if you want to, another destination vacation to watch your Heels for Thanksgiving, they'll be down in Florida taking on St. Bonaventure. A quality program out of the A-10. And then, of course, Michigan State. Carolina has a lot of history with the Spartans. They're coming off a Big Ten championship and making the Elite Eight of the NCAA tournament. With that, guys, that's going to wrap up this edition of the podcast. In the meantime, we'll encourage you to visit the website. That's HeelToughBlog.com. The Drake Powell news is there for you guys. You can go and read about that a little bit more in depth as we continue to keep you updated on all things Carolina basketball in the offseason. Same thing for Carolina football. We lost Amari Campbell yesterday to the portal. Another linebacker goes in the portal today. Anthony has you covered on that front. We encourage you guys to visit the website every single morning, afternoon, and evening for the latest and most up-to-date coverage of both Carolina basketball and Tar Heel football. As for the podcast, you guys know where to find us. Every major podcasting platform. Simply search the Four Corners Podcast. We will pop up. There, we encourage you guys to rate, review, and subscribe. That way you don't miss any editions of the show throughout the remainder of the basketball season. So with that, guys, this is going to wrap up this edition of the show. I thank Anthony once again for hosting with me. We want to thank you guys for watching and listening. And as always, go Tar Heels.